He said that when he heard the priest pronounce those words, "It's no longer human," he thought it was an exaggeration, drama, superstition mixed with fear. He thought the old man was trying to scare him, as many did when they wanted someone to stay away from a forbidden subject. But the priest wasn't speaking as someone trying to protect. He was speaking as someone who had already seen what happened when someone ignored the warning. His face was pale, his hands trembled slightly on the rosary, and his eyes, those wrinkled and tired eyes, didn't look at the ground or the sky. They looked at something that seemed to be standing still behind him, even though there was no one there. It all started weeks before, when he returned to the small town where he had grown up. The family home was quieter than usual, colder, as if time had stopped inside. His mother was ill, pale, speaking softly, always looking down the hallway as if expecting someone to appear at the door. And his older brother, well, his brother wasn't the same anymore. He didn't speak properly, didn't eat properly, didn't sleep properly. He spent hours sitting in the same corner of the house, his head tilted to the side, like someone listening to voices that come from nowhere. Sometimes he followed someone with his eyes, but only he could see that person. Sometimes he smiled at the void, but the smile was wrong, crooked, too wide to be human. That's when his mother, desperate, called the priest. An old priest, known in the region, respected not for being strict, but because his face bore the marks of someone who had dealt with things people prefer to forget. He arrived at the house, and the instant he crossed the threshold, the gentle smile vanished. His gaze hardened. He placed his hand on his chest, took a deep breath, and asked to see his brother. When he entered the room, there was no prayer. There was no blessing, only silence, a silence so brutal it hurt. The priest stood for a few minutes before his brother, who was sitting on the bed, staring fixedly at the opposite wall. The priest murmured his name. The brother turned slowly, with an almost choreographed slowness, and smiled. A smile that wasn't his, a smile that had never been his. The priest took a step back. An involuntary, almost instinctive step. He knew it instantly, and it was there that he uttered the phrase that changed everything. "This is no longer human." He asked the family to leave the room. He closed the door. He locked it, and he stayed inside for a long 20 minutes. The mother cried outside, saying that this couldn't be true. The father paced the house, unable to stand still, and he, the younger brother, tried to understand what the priest meant. What did he mean by no longer human? What else could it be? When the priest finally opened the door, his face was grey, sweat dripped down his forehead, and he held the rosary as if it were the only thing preventing something worse. He said in a firm but broken voice, "What's in him wasn't born with him. It came later." He tried to argue, saying it was just illness, just trauma, just something psychological. The priest shook his head. "You don't understand. He's not possessed. He's divided." The word fell like a stone. Divided? The priest explained that in some rare cases, very rare, a person can carry a presence that doesn't belong to this world, not because they called for it, not because they provoked it, but because it was chosen. Something finds a breach, a crack in the soul, and enters, little by little, silently. First, the gaze changes, then the voice, then the gesture, then the body, and when they realize it, they are no longer alone inside. Then the priest said something worse. He's not fighting to expel it. He's yielding. Nobody slept that night. The brother didn't leave the room. But in the early morning, they heard slow footsteps crossing the hallway. Footsteps that didn't match his weight, his rhythm, the way he walked. It was as if something else was testing his body from the inside, learning how to use it. At dawn, the priest returned, this time with holy water, candles, an old Bible, and a heavy, resigned look. He said he needed to try before it was too late, but upon opening the bedroom door, they realized it was already too late. The brother was no longer sitting on the bed. He was no longer in the corner. He wasn't lying down. He was standing in the center of the room, completely still, his arms loose at his sides, his head tilted back and his mouth open in an empty smile, as if waiting for someone to speak first. The priest froze. He, the younger brother, felt his stomach churn. The mother fell to her knees. The father recoiled until he hit the back of the wardrobe, and the brother spoke, but not with his voice, not with his breath. He spoke in a deep, uneven voice, as if someone were using his body as a sounding board. The voice said, "He let me in." And, at that moment they realized, the priest was right. What was inside the room was no longer human, and perhaps it never would be again. The priest stood motionless before his brother, as if every fiber of his being was trying to decide between advancing or fleeing. The room seemed smaller, narrower, as if the walls had closed in to prevent any escape. The light from the window was strangely dim, blocked by a shadow that didn't come from any cloud, and the brother, or what was inside him, remained, still motionless, smiling as if savoring every second of silence, as if waiting for someone to make the next move before responding. The priest took a step closer. The brother, without moving his body, followed with his eyes, but not with both. Only with his left eye. His right eye remained fixed on some point behind the priest, as if he saw something that shouldn't be there. The priest raised his rosary, and the brother tilted his head with a dry snap, as if breaking his neck just to observe, from a new angle. "I know who you are," the priest said, his voice firm, but with terror hidden between the syllables. The brother replied, with a smile wider than his flesh would allow, "I know you know." That voice didn't vibrate like a human voice. It vibrated like an echo from a huge, empty room, as if traversing miles of darkness before exiting the brother's mouth. The priest drew closer and began to pray in Latin so ancient that he himself didn't understand half of what he was saying. The Gaeshu brother laughed, not loudly, not aggressively, but like someone who finds humor in an old trick he's seen thousands of times. "You always try," the voice said. The priest ignored it. He continued praying. The mother wept in the hallway. The father, standing still, looked like a statue about to break. Then the brother made his first movement in hours. He didn't raise his arm. He didn't turn his body. He only took one step forward. A single step. But the impact of that gesture was like seeing a corpse move consciously. The room grew even colder. His breath, or the breath of the thing inside him, came out like vapor, even though there was no winter outside. The priest raised his hand, stopping the advance, but the thing took another step, as if testing the distance between predator and prey. "You don't know what's in there," the priest said. "Yes, I do," the thing replied, without moving its brother's lips. "He can still be saved." The smile vanished, and the voice became deeper, more resonant, as if coming from an even deeper place. "He invited me." The father collapsed to the floor when he heard this. The mother began to beat her chest, repeating that it wasn't true. But the priest, without taking his eyes off the brother, finally understood what was happening. "You didn't go in," the priest said. "Of course not." He opened the door. The thing smiled again, not crookedly, but with a childlike satisfaction, like someone showing off a new toy. "He wanted to forget, and I do that." The phrase hung in the air like poison. It made sense. His brother had spent years running from things he never talked about, from memories no one understood, from pain he hid behind silence and isolation. He had cracks, open doors, and something passed through them. The priest moved closer, even trembling. "This doesn't belong to his body. Get out." His brother slowly raised his chin as if being pulled by invisible threads, and the voice replied, "If I leave, he collapses." The mother screamed. The father covered his ears, and he, the younger brother, felt for the first time that this wasn't just a strange presence. It was a substitute, an emotional parasite, something that lives off the emptiness of others. A creature that only enters where it finds open wounds. The priest, now sweating profusely, made the sign of the cross and began to recite a prayer so powerful it seemed to come from within his soul, not his mouth. With each word, the brother spasmed, as if his body rejected the vibration of the phrases. The thing inside him began to writhe, trying to maintain control, but the priest wouldn't stop. "Go back to where you came from," he said, his voice trembling. And the entity, now furious, responded with a muffled roar that made the room shake. "I came from where he asked me to." At that same instant, all the objects in the room vibrated, the bed, the chair, the window, the floor, as if the very air had been struck. The brother fell to his knees, his head hanging forward. His voice came out weaker but even more terrifying. "I won't leave." It was then that the priest did something no one expected. He approached the brother, knelt before him, placed his hand on the back of his neck, and whispered something so low that no one heard. The entity heard and retreated, not with his body, with his gaze. For the first time, fear. The priest stood up, placed his hand on his brother's forehead, and said, "You are not allowed to stay." The entity screamed, but the scream didn't come from his mouth. It came from the walls. The scream that came from the walls didn't seem like sound. It seemed like pressure, as if the very air was being squeezed to escape through the cracks in the house. The lamp flickered 3 times, then shattered with a dry crack, leaving the room illuminated only by the dim light from the window. The brother fell to the side like a doll, his arms rigid, his hands twisted in an impossible position. The body seemed like his, but the movement didn't seem human. It was as if tendons and joints were being used by someone who never properly learned how a body works. The priest didn't back down. He knew that, at that moment, any step back would be seen as an invitation. He positioned himself between his brother and the rest of the family, as if he were a shield, even knowing that what was there didn't need physical force to destroy someone from the inside. The brother, or the thing inside him, began to rise. Not like a man rises, but like something trying to reorganize itself inside a borrowed body. First, the torso rose without the support of the arms, as if pulled by invisible threads. Then the spine cracked in sequence, tack, 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 from the coccyx to the nape of the neck. Finally, the head rotated a few centimeters more than a neck should allow. He said that was the moment he understood that the priest had never exaggerated. That thing was no longer human. The voice returned, but now it no longer came from the brother's mouth. It came from the back of his throat, as if something was scratching inside, trying to find the right way out. "He called me," the voice said, echoing as if 3 people were speaking at the same time. The mother was crying. The father was trembling as if he had a fever, and he, the youngest, couldn't blink. The thing took a step. The floor creaked. The priest raised his hand and shouted a phrase so ancient, so strong, that it seemed more like a command than a prayer. The brother's body froze. It became rigid, as if someone had flipped a switch inside him. His eyes rolled completely upwards, leaving only the whites exposed. It was then that something began to emerge, first as a tremor in his eyelids, then as a thin, liquid, slender shadow pushing out from inside his eyes, not from the eyeball, but from the shadow behind it. This thing seemed made of smoke, but it had weight. It seemed made of darkness, but it had form. It rose up the brother's forehead like a living stain, sliding until it stretched through the air, undulating like steam rising from warm flesh. The shadow, that thing, began to take on proportion. A faceless face, fingers too long, a column that didn't end, and in the center, a mouth that wasn't a mouth, a vertical cut, like a wound that smiled. The entity turned its face toward the priest, and the room became colder than the oldest winter. "You don't control me," the voice said, now echoing off the ceiling, the floor, the walls. It was as if it were speaking from inside the entire house. The priest didn't hesitate. He took a step closer, even trembling, and placed his hand on his brother's shoulder, who lay fallen, inert, unconscious. "If you try to take another body, I'll bind you to the name you fear." The entity stopped. The vertical smile closed. The air became so dense it seemed liquid. And then it did something no one expected. It looked at the younger brother. It looked deep, as if analyzing him, as if measuring. Every emotional crack, every hidden fear, every vulnerable space within his soul. And in a slow, almost affectionate movement, it extended its long hand toward him. The voice whispered, not in the air, but inside his head. "You would be better than him." The ground trembled. The mother screamed. The father tried to run to hold him, but he was trapped, immobile, hypnotized. The entity was choosing, and it was choosing him. The priest reacted at the last second. He slammed the rosary on the floor with such force that the beads shattered. The entity writhed as if impaled by light, and then it disappeared, vanishing in a dry snap that made the walls vibrate. The brother fell unconscious. The mother threw herself on him, crying. The father breathed like someone who had almost drowned, and the priest, pale, held the younger brother's face and said the phrase he never forgot. "She wasn't expelled, she was repelled, and when she returns, she will come for you." Since that day he sleeps with the door locked, the light on, and a crucifix beside his bed. But some nights at 3:14 a.m., his bedroom door moves on its own. It doesn't open, it doesn't close, it just breathes. Because something, deep within what the priest tried to push away, still calls him by name. A name he never said aloud, but that the entity somehow already knows. And now I ask you, do you believe it when someone warns you that you are no longer human? Or do you only believe it when it's too late?